going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of After the Whistle. Week 3 of the college football season is upon us. And I always mention it, but I think I mentioned it on last year's show or last season, whatever you want to say. How fast, once the college football season starts, how fast it just really gets away from us. I know that, we always are like, during the off season, we're always like, man, I can't wait for college football. We're counting down the days. I know I've got a few friends that have countdown clocks. They post on their Facebook, so many days, so many minutes, whatever, till the home opener, or till the opening game of the football season. And, it's just, it always seems to take forever to get here, but then once it gets here, it goes by way too fast. And it's kind of hard to believe that we're already here, starting and going into week 3. And we have a pretty good slate coming up this weekend. We got some ranked matchups, interconference. A lot of teams are starting their conference schedule this weekend. So definitely going to get into a little bit better quality, I guess, of football games. Not so much the, games versus the FCS schools and, Power 5 or Power 4 schools going up against Group of 5 schools or whatever, what have you. Now we kind of get into more or less the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the college football season and a lot of teams' college football schedules. Some great games coming up where this is going to be every Thursday. This is the prediction show. So we're going to go through I'm going to pick about 5 to 6 games. We're going to go through them. We're going to pick our scores, our winners, pick against the spread, whatever. I'll give you some information if you are a sports bettor, if you like to bet on, spreads, if you like to bet on point totals or whatever else. I'm going to give you the information. Do with it what you will. I will say, though, that this is, at the end of the day, this is opinion-based, and this is me looking at stats and facts and saying, like, hey, this is what I think's going to happen. But you know as well as I do that college football is a very, very volatile, sport, as we saw last weekend with USF and Florida. Not a whole lot of people saw that one coming. And, will we see something like that again this weekend? Who knows? But we're going to jump right in here. It's prediction time here on After the Whistle. We're going to jump right into probably the most marquee matchup of the weekend, and that's going to be Georgia and Tennessee playing up at Neyland Stadium there in Knoxville. A game that Georgia has definitely got the better of Tennessee over the last 8 years. 8 wins in a row for the Bulldogs. Kirby Smart and company have seemed to have had Tennessee's number. Tennessee has fielded some really good football teams during that span, minus a couple years. But as far as like the Josh Heupel era in Knoxville, they have put some pretty good teams on the field. And it seems like, every year we hear, the same thing around this football game. Is this the year? This is Tennessee's year. Tennessee looks great. Georgia doesn't look that good. This is going to be the year Tennessee wins. And here we are sitting at 8 years in a row, and same old song and dance for the Bulldogs here for the last few years in a row, 8 years in a row. And this game, I will say that this Tennessee team, and neither of these teams, when you look at them on paper so far this year, Tennessee playing Syracuse in their opener and then turning around and playing ETSA. Not really a very good sample size for the Volunteers as to what they're made out of. And then as far as, Georgia as well, you got Marshall and Austin Peay, and nobody really knows what the Bulldogs have to offer either. And I think I kind of like it because there's a lot of what's going to happen. There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of people scratching their heads about this game, about what is Tennessee going to bring to the table? What is Georgia going to bring to the table? And I think that's going to make for a very exciting matchup Saturday afternoon in Knoxville. Game's going to kick off at 3:30 on ABC. Georgia currently they opened as a 6.5 point favorite. That line is now down to a 3.5 point favorite by way of in the direction of the Bulldogs. So 3.5 point favorite for Kirby Smart and his crew. ESPN's FPI, which take it with a grain of salt. A lot of times it's wrong. I don't understand what they use, what methods they use to calculate these, but Tennessee's FPI gives Tennessee a 51.5% chance to win this football game. Now let's break this game down. Let's kind of unpack it a little bit and let's talk about it. So we look at two teams. This is kind of one of those games where it's kind of a prove it, weekend for a lot of teams. These two teams in particular, we look at, like I said, a Georgia team that at times has looked very underwhelming. And we look at a Tennessee team that has looked like offensively they are firing on all cylinders. However, the level of competition that the Volunteers have faced really don't give us a good idea of what they're going to be, what they're going to look like against a competent defense and a defense that can stress them out offensively. Tennessee and Josh Heupel's offense, a lot of people know the Josh Heupel offense in Tennessee for the old, a few years ago of the Hendon Hooker at quarterback and Jalen Hyatt, just streaking down the field. We all remember watching that Alabama game a few years ago when they beat Alabama in Knoxville, and just Jalen Hyatt had, I can't even remember how many receiving yards, but it was unreal. They just took the lid off that defense, didn't let up, just scored a bunch of points. Blew past the projection of how many points were going to be scored in that football game. And we look at those teams and we think that we look at Tennessee as a pass offense, a stress you out, the receivers line up almost on the sideline. They really spread the defense really thin, and that is all by design. And it's not so much that Josh Heupel wants to spread the defense out to pass the ball down the field. He wants to spread the defense out because he's playing a numbers game in the middle of the field. He wants to stress that defense out to a point, a lot of 4-wide, 5-wide sets with a single back in the backfield. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to get the numbers to his favor on the interior, so to speak, in the trenches, that front seven for whatever defense he's going up against, and then his offense. So when you have a 5-wide set or a 4-wide set, you have to commit more resources as a defense to stopping and to covering those guys down the field. Especially a team like Georgia that is primarily a man coverage defense. You have to commit man on man to those guys on the outside. And what that does when it takes 4 or 5 defenders in that second level and matches them up to a receiver, it makes them to where they're occupied to that certain offensive player. Therefore, stresses the defense out, spreads them out, and it allows Josh Heupel's offense to run the football. And they have the numbers advantage there where it's pretty much a one-on-one type thing. Each guy's got one guy to block, and it plays very well in Tennessee's favor. Every time that we've seen a team have success against Tennessee, we have seen a team that has been able to stop the run against Tennessee. We've seen that with Georgia over the last 8 matchups. I believe 7 of the last 8 matchups, Georgia has outrushed Tennessee, last year being the only year that Georgia didn't outrush Tennessee. And I think it was a very slim margin. Tennessee outrushed Georgia by like 20 or 30 yards. But either way, that to me is a big key factor in a football game against Tennessee, and this is a big key factor of for Georgia as well. Keys to the game for Georgia is going to be, slowing down that running game. Tennessee's got this guy named Star Thomas, very good running back, wears number 9. Big guy out of Louisiana, a senior. I think he's along the lines of 6'1", north of 200 pounds, just a very bruising running back. Very, Josh Heupel's had some really good ones. Mainly a guy by the name of Dylan Sampson, who, shout out Dylan Sampson, got him on my fantasy team. So very good running back. And Tennessee has a guy in Star Thomas that is a tough tackle. He's one of those guys that, you really don't want him one-on-one in the open field with an undersized player. You really want to try to, corral him, box him up, and tackle him with more than one body. He's that type of runner. Very physical, great contact balance. Just runs really well behind his pads. Can't say enough about the kid. Just a very dynamic runner. This game is going to ride on, to me, for him, they've got to get the run started for Tennessee. If the key to Georgia is stopping the run, the key to Tennessee is running the football. And I feel like the game is going to live and die in that area. It's either going to be Georgia stops the run or Tennessee runs at will. And, if Tennessee can run the football, then you're looking at play action and you're looking at Joey Aguilar hitting some shots downfield. the biggest question mark I have for this Tennessee offense going up against this Georgia defense is when you go back and look at Joey Aguilar. He's in his third season or fourth season, I believe, playing college football. When you look at his past, his record, when you look at it, he's never played an SEC defense. He's played Clemson. He's played team like North Carolina. He's played at Appalachian State. He's played some Power 4 opponents, but he's never played an SEC school. This is his first time seeing an SEC defense, and it's his first time playing against an SEC team in general. And what a way to introduce Joey Aguilar to the Southeastern Conference than by saying, hey, historically this has been the best defense over the last decade in the Southeastern Conference, so here you go. Let's see what you're made out of. Let's test your mettle a little bit. And for Tennessee, another key to this game is they cannot allow Georgia to rattle Aguilar early, because what we saw last year, and I'm going to reference the Georgia-Texas game because that's probably one of the best games to reference in this scenario, is you saw a team that was firing on all cylinders, in Texas last year. Georgia goes into Darrell K. Royal Stadium and really rattles the quarterback in Quinn Ewers early. Gets a couple sacks, forces a fumble, forces a couple errant throws, by way of just a lot of different, Kirby loves to disguise pressures. A lot of stems, a lot of different, looks he's going to give you, a lot of stunts up front, a lot of blitzes coming from directions you're not expecting. It maybe look like a guy's blitzing from the right side of the field. There's really a guy coming from the left. He does a good job at disguising those. So I think another question mark for Tennessee is, how does Joey Aguilar manage that? Because he's going to see some things on Saturday he has not seen in his collegiate career for App State. He's just not. The level of competition when he played at App State is nowhere near. I mean, we're talking complete opposite ends of the spectrum from what he's going to see on Saturday against this Georgia defense. And likewise, if Tennessee's key to the game is running the football and keeping Georgia's defense honest to open up shots downfield, likewise, Georgia is kind of got to be in the same boat. Tennessee, obviously, it benefits Georgia. We don't want anybody hurt. You'd ever want to wish ill on anything, on any player, but Tennessee's going to be missing their two starting corners on the outside. That is another key for Georgia, is can they take the top off of this Tennessee defense? Because this Tennessee defense is a very formidable defense. This is not, obviously last year they had James Pierce Jr., they had a couple more dynamic players on that side, but Tennessee's kind of reloaded. They still have a competent defense. It's a defense that's going to make it difficult to run the football on. And when you look at it, Georgia has not really faced, a defense where they have to really grind and scratch and claw for yards running the football. They've, the last two games they've played, they've really been able to run at will. I felt like they ran the ball pretty well against Austin Peay, and they ran the ball well against Marshall. So this will be the first test for Georgia, and also for Gunnar Stockton as well. How involved is Gunnar Stockton's legs going to be in this football game? How much of a factor is that going to play into the result of this football game? Also, can Gunnar take the lid off of this Tennessee defense? Because we've seen a lot of indecisiveness from Gunnar Stockton throughout the first two games of the season. He looked a lot better against Marshall than he did against Austin Peay. However, against Austin Peay, a lot of checkdowns, a lot of guys down the field that were open. Just don't know if it was a thing of him not seeing them or him just being gun shy and not wanting to turn the ball loose in those situations. And to me, it's now or never for Gunnar Stockton. You've got to push the ball down the field. There were some times last year when he took over for Carson Beck there in the SEC championship game against Texas. He pushed the ball down the field. And against Notre Dame, there was a couple really good throws he made down the field. Drops were a key factor. He made a beautiful pass to Dylan Bell down the field against Notre Dame. It got dropped. It's not a thing of Gunnar can't do it. We've seen him do it. The issue here is I've seen a very gun-shy Gunnar Stockton so far, especially during in the Austin Peay game. Not so much against Marshall, but more so against Austin Peay, where he just seems to be like he just doesn't want to quite turn the ball loose. And a lot can happen with that. You know, when you've got the dynamic receivers that Georgia's got this year with Colby Young, with Noah Thomas, with Zachariah Branch, just that three-headed monster there. You've got two guys on the outside that are just big physical receivers. Colby Young, 6'5", 220 pounds. Then you've got a Noah Thomas who's 6.5 feet tall, around 220, 225. And then you've also got a Zachariah Branch who's lightning in a bottle. You know, to me, the key is going to be Georgia's got to be able to run the football. We don't want Gunner throwing it 40 to 50 times a game. That's not a recipe to win this football game at all. But you also have to use those dynamic playmakers on the outside, use Zachariah Branch. Those two corners being absent for Tennessee are going to be – those guys are getting replaced by younger, more inexperienced players. You've got to take advantage of those matchups. And it's an unfortunate way to win a football game, because you still have fans on the other side that'll be like, well, if our starting cornerbacks weren't hurt, we'd have beat you. Well, you know, you lost, so who cares? But Georgia's got to be able to take advantage of that. Got to be able to run the football. Got to be able to take advantage of the shots down the field. Use your playmakers, you know, to use those playmakers on the outside. Like I said, the line 3.5 points. And you know, with Tennessee scoring as many points as they are, you know, we've seen averaging, you know, where they averaging like 60 points a game, you know, in between 50 and 60 points a game so far through 2 games. You know, they're putting up points in bunches. Just scored 72 this past weekend. I believe this is going to be a game where it's going to be more low scoring. It's not going to be, I feel like it's going to be a slugfest. It's going to be a hoot. Both teams are going to try to establish the run and try to run the football. So it's not going to be a shootout. I don't foresee this being a game where we see just back and forth touchdown passes, just back and forth and back and forth. I saw a fan's score prediction online of 47-40 Georgia, and I think that is way out of left field. I don't see these teams combining to score 87 points, not in the slightest. My score prediction for this game, I've got Georgia winning this one. I just think that Kirby Smart's defensive game plan, the fact that you've got a quarterback on the other side that's making his first start against an SEC defense and an SEC opponent, I think he's going to make some mistakes. I mean, he threw 14 picks last year at App State. So most of those picks, too, came under duress and under pressure, and like a lot of quarterbacks. So I feel like Georgia's going to find some creative ways. Kirby and Glenn Schumann, they're going to come up with some very creative ways to pressure Joey Aguilar and make him uncomfortable. It comes down to, I just trust the defensive staff and the defensive play calling of Kirby more than I trust the other side. Given the track record of Heupel, Kirby's got his number, I feel like. I've got the Dogs winning this one 27-17, covering the spread of 3.5 points, 27-17. I feel like it could creep into that 27-20 range, but 27-17 is what I've got currently written down right here, and I'm going to just stick to my guns on that one. So, so that way you Tennessee fans, y'all can blow me up if y'all end up, flipping that score or ended up, beating us or whatever. You can flip it around on me. However, so a couple games I'd like to talk about, and everybody talks about who upset alert. This is a weekend where I feel like we've got a couple games where we could talk about upset alerts, so to speak. And I'm going to talk about one first in particular, and I'm going to talk about another one. First one I'm going to talk about is Clemson and Georgia Tech. Clemson going on the road to play an undefeated 2-0 Georgia Tech team. Clemson only favored currently by 2.5 points. I know what a lot of people are thinking. Man, Clemson should not be a 2.5 point favorite to Georgia Tech at any time. But it's 2025. Wild things have already happened so far in this college football season, so here we are. And what I've seen, Georgia Tech's a very nasty team, very hit you in the mouth, very physical football team. Brent Key's done a heck of a job up there in Atlanta with those guys. And from what we saw from Clemson last Saturday against Troy, there's not a lot to be, there's not a lot there to be not excited about, but you just don't want to put a whole lot of trust in this Clemson team as of right now. We saw them in week 1 drop the game to LSU, and then you see them come back against Troy, kind of sleepwalk through the first half of that football game, ultimately come back and win at 27-16 thanks to the performance of Bryant Wesco Jr., Cade Klubnik. But this, to me, feels like a spot where Georgia Tech could steal one. And, with Georgia Tech, with the running back that they have and Jamal Haynes, just a very good running back there out of Loganville, Georgia boy, Grayson High School, 5'9", 190, just a very dynamic runner. Georgia Tech wants to run the football. And this is probably one of the best offensive line units that Brent Key's had since he's been in Atlanta there at Georgia Tech. They want to be physical. They want to run the football, and there's nothing that they've done so far this year, whether it be against, Garner Webb is one thing, but against Colorado as well. But there's nothing that, tells you otherwise that they don't want to run the football. Against Garner Webb, they had 223 yards. I think they averaged 8 yards a carry. And then against Colorado, they ran the ball pretty effectively as well, to the tune of 320 yards. So even better, and they averaged 6.8 yards a carry. So all in all, this Georgia Tech team averaging 7 roughly yards a carry through 2 games. The key to Clemson is going to be, hey, Peter Woods. I know I said it before the season, like one of the best, if not the best, you could make the argument, best player in college football. Like, where's Peter Woods at? Like, you want to stop the run, that's the guy it needs to start with. It needs to start with this Clemson defensive front that we heard about all offseason long, talked about how good Clemson's defense was going to be. And we haven't really seen a whole lot of that yet. I mean, they've shown some signs of flash. They've been flashy at times. They only held LSU to really 17 points. And by all stretch of the imagination, when you look at the total yards of the team, they held them to 108 yards rushing on 32 carries. So, they have it there. But to me, this is a spot where it's a potential letdown spot for Clemson. Noon kick, you're in Atlanta. Don't know what the crowd's going to look like, really. You never know with that Georgia Tech crowd. I mean, they could show up. They couldn't. It just depends. But to me, I think Clemson goes into Atlanta. I think they avoid the letdown, but I think it is a tight football game. Very tight football game. I think Bryant Wesco Jr., I think between him, I think Adam Randall, between Adam Randall, Bryant Wesco Jr., I think Cade Klubnik kind of gets things a little bit more rolling here, needs to calm down on the interceptions. He's already thrown 2 this year. Can't really do that. But don't turn the ball over. Let Randall run the football and then go over the top to Wesco to take the lid off this Georgia Tech defense. And, I feel like Clemson comes out of Atlanta with a win. But like I said, I feel like it is a very tight contest. I feel like Clemson wins this football game 26-24. I don't feel like it's going to be a track meet style football game, but I'm going to call Clemson 26, Georgia Tech 24 on that one. Another letdown spot that I feel like people need to keep an eye on, potential letdown spot, is a team that really shocked the world last Saturday by beating the Florida Gators in Gainesville. And the question here is, can USF do this again? Byron Brown, a very dynamic guy at the quarterback position, running the football and throwing the football. Also, you got to remember Keyshawn Singleton, wide receiver for them as well at USF, very dynamic playmaker on the outside, great hands, runs great routes, gets off the ball really well, generates separation. We can talk about what happened last weekend till we're blue in the face. And I've seen it, we've seen it all week. We've seen the hype around South Florida. We've seen, they beat Florida, so now all of a sudden they should be a top 5 football team. I think we need to pump the brakes on that one, because I don't think, and I'm guilty of saying that I thought that Florida before the season started was an 8-4 football team. I thought they were a lot better than what they showcased last Saturday. But enter USF. USF wins, and we don't really know where Florida's at. I mean, Florida could by all means go 3-9, from when you look at their schedule. So, and Boise State, we really don't know either how good Boise State is. I mean, and UCF dragged Boise State, but Boise State is not the same football team they were last year when they had a guy by the name of Ashton Genty running the football. So, looking at USF, I think this is a game where we're brought back down to reality here. And what I mean by that is USF's kind of had 2 weeks. They're kind of on cloud nine. And Miami has a very, very nasty offensive line and defensive line. Miami's probably one of the teams that they're as good in the trenches as any other team in college football. Very good O-line, very good D-line. Guy by the name of Reuben Bain, you'll hear his name a lot probably come Saturday. Very dynamic playmaker there on that Miami defense. And Miami currently favored by 17.5. So big line. I've heard some people say they're indifferent about that line. I've heard some people say that they feel like that it should be tighter. They feel like they're a little higher on USF, which something about USF, get on my soapbox for a second, it's always irked me. They're based out of like the Tampa area and they're University of South Florida. But anyway, Miami, South Florida. South Florida is, USF is more central, Florida. They're on that west side of Florida. But either way, I digress. This is a game I feel like we're going to be, USF's going to be brought back down to reality. I still think that, they got a good football team. I still think they can make a bid for that group of 5 bid into the college football playoff. From what I've seen so far, they are the best team at that group of 5 level. So I'm not writing them off and saying that I think they're just going to lose out. I do not see them beating Miami. I see Miami. Carson Beck's playing really good football. He's being protected. He's got some really dynamic receivers on the end. Malachi Toney, really good receiver there on the outside for Miami. And also, you've also got Mark Fletcher Jr. at running back. And, they've just got a very good Mario Cristobal's put together a really good football team down there in Coral Gables. And I think Miami, hot take, I think Miami might be the best team in the ACC. Now, that will all come out in the wash when Miami plays Florida State here in a few weeks. We'll kind of see what Miami's working with, and we'll see also what Florida State's working with then as well. But to me right now, from what I've seen so far, Miami's got to be my, favorite to win the ACC this year. From what I've seen from Miami, Florida State, Clemson, I think Miami's the best team out of those three teams. A lot of season left though. This to me though, and I've been kind of back and forth on this. Do I think that it's a game where Miami has to escape late and maybe they win by 10 points? Maybe they win that, maybe it's a little closer than some people anticipate, but I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here. And I'm going to go with my gut because my gut's telling me that I think this game is going to get out of hand early. I think this game is going to finish along the lines of 41-20 Miami. And I think that just the USF, hype train ends in Coral Gables this weekend, and I think Miami beats them 41-20. That's my final score on that one. I just think Miami's just too fast, too physical. They're too well coached, because I will say that Mario Cristobal is a lot better football coach than Billy Napier. I know, and given the fact of what USF was able to do last weekend against Florida, they're not sneaking up on anybody now. You know as well as I do, Mario Cristobal's been preaching to his guys all week in practice, like, you saw what happened to that team in Gainesville. We're not going to let that happen here. And, I feel like this just turns into a game. It gets out of hand early. Maybe there's a couple turnovers in Miami's favor, and they get ahead a couple scores, and then they just build off of that, and the final score ends up being 41-20. So I just don't feel like – I've seen some people put Miami on upset watch. I don't see that happening whatsoever. So Wisconsin, Alabama. So another game that I'm kind of, I'm not going to talk about it at length because I just don't think that Wisconsin is at the level to compete with Alabama. Even though we saw Alabama lose to Florida State in week 1, I still think this is still a really good football team, a really physical team. They have the roster to hang with almost anybody in college football. And Wisconsin, you look at who they played: Miami, Ohio, Middle Tennessee State. Miami, Ohio, they beat them 17-0. They beat Wisconsin, or they beat Middle Tennessee State 42-10. They also are a team that we look at and we're like, what do they have? Luke Fickell still leading that football team there. I just, I like what he's doing in Wisconsin. I think they might be progressing a little bit, but this Bama team will prove to be too much for Wisconsin. Also, we've seen some turnover issues for Wisconsin this year so far. That's not a good recipe to beat a team like Alabama. Never has been, never will be, regardless of who's coaching. In football in general, doesn't matter if you're playing Alabama or if you're playing whoever, you can't turn the football over, and Wisconsin's already had a few turnovers this year. I feel like this is a game that could get, also like I said about the Miami and USF game, I feel like this is a game that could get out of hand early. Bama currently favored by 20.5 points. I like that line to a certain extent. I don't think Bama covers. I think it's close to that number, but I don't think they cover. I've got Bama winning this football game 33-16. I'll give Wisconsin 16 points just because I feel like it, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if Wisconsin's offense is good enough to put up 16 points on this Bama defense, but 33-16 sounds like a really good number. I just feel like Bama's offense is going to be way too dynamic for Wisconsin. Ty Simpson, looked a lot better. And let's say one thing about Ty Simpson too. I think I mentioned it after the Florida State loss. Ty Simpson was not the problem in that Florida State game. The defense was the problem in that Florida State game. Ty Simpson wasn't the problem. Ty Simpson's been playing really good football so far this year. And if y'all will just take the blinders off and quit trying to find somebody to blame and just look at the facts, look at the numbers here, Ty Simpson's playing really good ball. I think that continues into Wisconsin. I haven't seen anything out of Wisconsin on defense that leads me to believe that they're going to give Ty Simpson any kind of problems or any kind of fits. And I just think that Alabama is just too powerful, overmatches Wisconsin, and wins 33-16. So moving right on to another game that I feel like we've got a few more here, and I feel like one trap spot. And this is my other upset pick of the week, potential upset, I guess you could say. Just like the Georgia Tech and Clemson spot, I feel like this is a game that could be one of those spots where we're looking at it, Saturday night when we're watching it, and after the game's over, we're like, oh man, that was a good one. And we're shocked at the result. And that's Arkansas and Ole Miss. Ole Miss after last weekend, I'm not going to put a lot of stock in Ole Miss. After what I saw, I'm just not too comfortable with Lane Kiffin and that offense. Mainly Austin Simmons. I know that, people were very high on him, me included, with the way he throws the football. Last year we saw him come in garbage time. We saw him come in against Georgia. We've seen him at times look really good, but hasn't quite lived up to the hype and has turned into a little bit of a turnover machine. And the last thing that you need to do against a team like Arkansas, who's got the run game that they have, led by Taylor Green at quarterback, who I think is a really good athlete, who can hurt you with his feet as well. The last thing you want to do is keep giving Arkansas extra possessions, with Taylor Green, Mike Washington Jr. You don't want to continue to let them just bleed the clock. And Arkansas is going to come in with that strategy. They're going to come in with the strategy of, we're going to run the football with Washington and Green. And if Ole Miss turns the ball over once, maybe even twice, it could be very problematic for that football team. One of the key points, one of the benefits for Ole Miss, you are at home. Arkansas's got to come on the road. Vaught Hemingway is a sneaky tough place to play. You know, you don't have a lot of fans in the stands. It's not as big as a lot of the SEC stadiums, but it's still a sneaky tough place to play. A lot of Giants have gone into that football stadium and lost, i.e. Georgia last year, Bama, you know, back when Hugh Freeze was the coach. You know, they've slayed some Giants in that building before. I'm not saying Arkansas is a giant, but I'm saying Arkansas is definitely a formidable foe at this very point. Ole Miss currently favored by 7.5 points. I'm taking Arkansas in this one. And I know I might shock some people with that. But I'm taking Arkansas in a slugfest. Give me Arkansas 26, Ole Miss 21. You know, give it a little bit more of a, you know, mid-20s, low-20s scoring affair there in Oxford, Mississippi on Saturday night at 7 on ESPN. I like Arkansas. I like Taylor Green. I like what he's able. I like Washington at running back. I like what they bring to the table, and I think that Sam Pittman's going to have them guys ready to go, and I think Ole Miss slips up and drops one at home on Saturday night. Florida and LSU. Not much to say about this one. I don't think. I mean, given what we saw last weekend with USF, given what we've seen so far this week with Billy Napier is just getting dragged online and on message boards. It's really entertaining. If you have the time to go get a membership to 247 Sports or wherever where you can read fan message boards, let me tell you, worth it. If you can carve out 10 to 15 minutes of your day to go comb through message boards, there are definitely some good reads there, especially after a team loses. After the Bama loss to Florida State, the Bama message boards were on fire. It's awesome. Likewise, Florida loses to USF. The Florida message boards all week this week so far have been en fuego. Just fire Billy, fire everybody, burn Bill Hill Griffin Stadium down. You know, I mean, everybody's just done with Florida. There was even people talking about boycotting the remaining home games as long as Billy Napier's the head coach. I mean, just really just hammering Billy Napier. And I don't think that that's going to change really at all. Going into Death Valley at night, 7:30 p.m. kick on ABC. Death Valley at night is where a lot of teams go to die. And I think Saturday night, that's where Billy Napier is going to go to die. I don't foresee, you don't know, does Florida fire Billy Napier after a loss to LSU in Death Valley on Saturday? It's hard to say. I had somebody ask me that question, and I told him I'd do my best to try to answer it. I don't know if they get rid of him if he loses to LSU in Death Valley, because everybody's expecting him to. I mean, you're talking about the number 3 team in the country, LSU, Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback. You've got Barrion Brown, wide receiver, Aaron Anderson, wide receiver. LSU's just really dynamic on the offensive side of the football. And also can't forget Cade Durham running the rock as well. You know, LSU's just got a very dynamic offense. Florida is just not ready for this matchup. Earlier in the season, before the season started, I had this game circled on my calendar thinking that could be a good one. You know, that could be a big one because I felt like Florida would get to this spot. Both these teams would get to this spot at 2-0, and this would kind of be a matchup to where it would be a prove-me type game. And Billy Napier and that Florida team robbed us of a good matchup, of a good ranked-on-ranked matchup at night in Death Valley, because really nobody's expecting this to be a good football game, myself included. I think LSU steamrolls Florida. I don't think this game's close. I think Florida scores 13 points. I think LSU scores 31. I think it's an absolute blowout. LSU's currently favored by 7.5. I say hammer the over. If you want to put some money on it, do it. I think it's a pretty safe bet. But 31-13 LSU. I think Garrett Nussmeier has a game where he plays out of his mind. The crowd affects DJ Lagway. I think Florida turns the ball over a couple times, can't get out of their own way. You know, the same mistakes we've been seeing from a just undisciplined football team. Hopefully we won't get anybody spitting loogies in the other team's face anymore, but you never know with that Florida bunch, with the way that they conduct themselves under Billy Napier as the head coach. Florida has no chance. I really don't foresee it happening in this football game and in this spot. I think Florida leaves Baton Rouge 1-2, and I think Billy Napier is unemployed by Monday morning. I think that's my hot take. Texas A&M and Notre Dame. Another game that kind of is one of those prove me spots. That's what I'm going to call this weekend. It's prove me weekend. Prove it. For a lot of these teams. And Texas A&M and Notre Dame, we know what kind of brand of football that we're getting from these two teams. From Notre Dame, you're getting a team that's led by Marcus Freeman, who prides himself on his teams being physical. He wants that level of physicality in South Bend. And Texas A&M also with Mike Elko. They want to be physical, running the football. Both of these teams want to do the same thing. They want to play good defense and stop the run. They want to run the football on offense. Notre Dame currently favored by 6.5 points, mainly because I think they're at home. The line's kind of swinging that way. We have an interesting quarterback matchup here, though. Marcel Reed, who's playing, pretty good football so far this year. And then we also have C.J. Carr for Notre Dame, who hasn't looked bad, didn't look bad against Miami, so we have a decent quarterback matchup. But then to me, Marcel Reed currently is leading Texas A&M in rushing. I feel like with Le'Veon Moss, who you'll remember if you listened to the podcast last year, you'll remember me saying Le'Veon Moss to me at one point last year was the best running back in the SEC. And then he goes down with an injury. He's out for the rest of the season. I think he comes back this year. He's kind of come back with a vengeance. And between Reed and Moss, I'd like to say, I'd love to classify this as, a team ranked 16th beating a team ranked 8th. I'd like to say it's an upset, but a winless Notre Dame at number 8 to me, I don't have any belief in them whatsoever. They're not the same team they were a year ago. They're definitely not a bad football team. They're definitely more than capable of winning this football game. The big question and the big keys to victory here for Notre Dame is going to be Notre Dame has got to get Jeremiah Love going early. Got to feed him the football, get him going early. Really hammer this Texas A&M defense. Punch them in the mouth. That's what you're going to have to do if you're Notre Dame. If you're Notre Dame, you don't want to put this all on C.J. Carr. As a freshman, it's a big-time start for him. I don't think you want to stress him out too much and put the weight of the football game on his shoulders. I think you've got to, you've got to be able to run the football. Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, you have to be able to run this football. You've got two very good running backs, probably one of the best tandems in college football, if not the best tandem in college football, and you need to be able to run. You need to be able to run it. Jeremiah Love was a no-show against Miami. Jadarian Price had 6 carries for 40-something yards. Not a very good outing as well. So we need to see a more dynamic run game for Notre Dame for me to believe that they're anywhere close to what they were last year. For that very reason, though, I believe Mike Elko and his team's going to get a 3-0 start. They're going to win this football game in South Bend. I think it's going to be tight. I think it's going to be a very hard-fought football game. I've got Texas A&M winning this one 23-20. A little bit more of a low-scoring affair, but to me, these two teams are built very similar. They want to do similar things. They want to be physical. They want to run the football. I think you're going to see, you're going to see a lot of just pounding the football, on both sides. I don't think if this is a game where if you want to watch a football game that's just got two very electric passers where they're just throwing all over the yard and zinging it here and zinging it there, I don't think this is the game you need to tune into. This is definitely a game that is going to be a real good old-fashioned just slobber knocker, so to speak, a slugfest. So, 23-20. I like that. I like that. 23-20 is going to be my pick there. Texas A&M over Notre Dame. I think Texas A&M maybe either scores a touchdown late to pull ahead or kicks a field goal to win it, late in the game. But yeah, 23-20 is I feel is a good number for that one. I really don't see either of those teams scoring 30 or more. Vanderbilt and South Carolina going to be the last one we talk about here on today's episode. Another spot where Vanderbilt's definitely been playing good enough football to beat South Carolina. And South Carolina, beats Virginia Tech to open the season, and then last week we see Carolina to kind of take a step back. It's like, take a step forward, beat Virginia Tech, and then last week take 2 steps back because you don't look near as good against South Carolina State as we expected. Now you still win the game by 28 points, but it wasn't one of those football games where it was a 28-point win, but it wasn't a game where it really jumped out to everybody like, wow, South Carolina looked really good. Did you see Carolina? They looked sharp against South Carolina State. But the key factor here is, South Carolina beats Virginia Tech to open the season 24-11. Vanderbilt turns around last week, beats Virginia Tech 44-20. Just a very big time showing from that Vanderbilt football team. Very high offensive output. I mean, when's the last time we saw a Vanderbilt team score 40? I mean, they don't score 40 that very often. You got Diego Pavia, kind of leading the way there. Cedric Alexander at running back, just very dynamic running back as well. One of their most dynamic pass catchers, Trey Richardson. Also, Vanderbilt's got a squad this year that can make a little bit of noise. I'm not saying that they're going to win the SEC or even compete for it. And by no stretch of the imagination am I saying that I believe what Diego Pavia was peddling before the season started, that they're going to win a national championship, because that is the furthest thing from what they can win. They'll make it honest. They'll probably win 7 or 8 games, go to the Pop-Tart Bowl, and win that one and be happy, and everybody will ride off into the sunset, and they'll consider it a win. But Vanderbilt's not a 10, 11, not even a 9-win football team this year. However, are they good enough to beat South Carolina? Yes, they are. And I think they showed that last week with the way that they handled Virginia Tech, a team that it took South Carolina a little while to really put away. Given that, and we know of the volatility and the parity in the college football game to where one team, like South Carolina beating Virginia Tech 24-11 in week 1 has nothing to do with Vanderbilt beating Virginia Tech 44-20. Every week, things can change. Things get different. A lot of things change week to week in college football. Does Vanderbilt have the roster, and does Vanderbilt have the ability to compete with South Carolina? And is Vanderbilt going to beat South Carolina is the best question here, and the answer for me is no. South Carolina is going to win this game. I do not think that they're going to win it comfortably, though. I think South Carolina fans might be sweating a little bit at some point. Currently, they're favored by 4.5 points. But to me, I think this is going to be one of those games where I think it's going to be tight at halftime. I think it could even be tied at halftime, 10-10, 13-13, something along those lines. And then I think South Carolina wakes up a little bit in the second half, builds a little bit of separation, and then South Carolina ends up winning this game 33-24. South Carolina is what I'm going to call on this one. 33-24 final score in Columbia, mainly because night game in Columbia, tough spot for Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt still has a great roster, still off to a good start. They'll be 2-1 after Saturday. But South Carolina, to me, between the atmosphere, if you've ever been in that stadium before and watched a game in there, I can tell you, those people in Columbia are lunatics. And that place is going to be rocking. It's going to be loud. And then you have Lenore Sellers, who, I've definitely said enough about him on this show. One of the best quarterbacks in the SEC, if not the best. Big physical runner, just can make things happen. And then with Oscar Attaway running the football, and then also Nick Harbor on the outside, they just have a very good three-headed monster there. Lenore Sellers leading the way, obviously. I feel like they're too much for Vanderbilt, and I feel like that'll be your final score in the football game, 33-24 South Carolina, and they'll get out of there 3-0, leading up to a big matchup in Columbia, Missouri next Saturday. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed the picks there. This has been another episode of After the Whistle. Like I said earlier in the show, do with those picks what you wish. I'm not saying that you need to follow all my picks by the letter of the law verbatim, and you need to, use them and put all your... Don't bet the mortgage on my picks now. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, because if you lose your house because of me, I'm not going to answer my phone when you come calling and try to blame me for it. So, but by all means, bet responsibly, be safe this weekend, everyone. And we will catch y'all on the next episode of After the Whistle. Big weekend of football. Y'all enjoy time with your family, grill out, have a few cold beverages, you know what I'm saying? And let's watch some football. I'll catch y'all next time.